This is your coffee break. Hey friends, Sarah here. I'm back again this week. I have with me a guest I'm very excited to share with you. His name is Bob Stromberg, and he is a master of creativity. I'm so excited about this. A quick bio here before we get into our conversation. From his home in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is right here by Sioux Falls where I live, Bob Stromberg travels continually performing his unique blend of original story, stand-up, and shtick. His work has left lasting impressions on Fortune 500 companies, raised multi-millions for nonprofits, garnered literary and theater awards, and even broken box office records in the US and Europe. The London Times has said he is a genuinely funny man. The Chicago Sun-Times called him a mesmerizing physical comedian. And most impressively, Bob has recently started a podcast. It's called the Wideeyed Creative, and I'm very excited to share this with you. Bob has joined a very small group of elite artists who has stayed prolific and profitably busy for over 40 years. He has done this by mastering the art of creativity, which is an online class that he has started as well. And so, Bob, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for having me. It's just a delight to be on your podcast. I want you to know that I'm a fan of yours and your podcast. I just think it's great. This morning, I listened to one podcast last night, and this morning I listened to your Coffee Break 45 with Ryan Dalton.
Oh, yeah.
And I haven't read Ryan and didn't know Ryan, but I just thought the podcast was wonderful, and I went right on iTunes, which all of your listeners should do, by the way. I went right on iTunes and I left a review there. I leave short reviews, and my review was, yes, what a great podcast, and I really believe it. It's just congratulations. It's wonderful.
Oh, Bob, thank you so much. That just means the absolute world to me. Thank you so much.
You bet.
I would just love to get a little bit of a background with your relationship with creativity. I always think that it's so interesting to delve into people's lives and see how creativity has affected them and how that they've embraced that. So could you tell us a little bit about your story?
Oh, absolutely. I sat in a third grade music class. I was 8 years old. And our teacher, Miss Nagel, came in the room. And Miss Nagel was a very large woman. And she sat on with her back to us, she sat on a very small music stool, which tickled all of us. And she began playing a new song that we had not heard before. And it was, honestly, I remember this. I see it in my mind. It was number 14 in our songbook. I can see a thin picture across the top of the page, an Amish-looking fellow walking through a late summer meadow, storm clouds in the back, a splash of Blue River in the foreground. And she began playing this song, and it was Shenandoah. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to see you, gone away, you rolling river. And one can only imagine how terrible this sounded with 30 8-year-olds singing it, not knowing the song, but still singing at the top of their lungs. And I sat there, 8 years old, honest to goodness, I burst into tears. And my classmates looked at me, which was embarrassing. And then when the song was done, I was sort of sobbing there. And Miss Nagel made her way down the aisle, and she asked me what was wrong. But I couldn't answer, because how does a third grader, an 8-year-old, describe what it means to be overwhelmed by the beauty of art? I was absolutely, and you would think, well, there must be something wrong with this boy's home or his family, or there's something going on. There was nothing going on in that way. I was just bowled over by the beauty of that melody. And I'm singing words like, oh, Shenandoah, I love your daughter, gone away, you rolling river. I have no idea what this means. But I was the melody just it overwhelmed me. I was just overcome by the beauty of art, and that began for me. And that was 8 years old. That began for me a journey of being involved with art and creativity. Growing up in this little culturally deprived town in Pennsylvania, a little factory town. There's no art at all there, but I was just captured by it. It had me. I began writing songs when I was a young teenager. I began telling stories about those songs and then singing the songs when I was in college. I went and saw Marcel Marceau when I was in Paris one summer during college. And I ended up studying mime and acting then for 2 years after that, and then began performing and writing short stories and writing plays and writing comedy material. Comedy has been the real, for 40 years, that's what I've done. But then I've also done it in theater and through plays and so not just all stand-up comedy, in other words, and storytelling. But that's what I've done now for 40 years. And I began to look back. Actually, I was digging through some books back in 2015, some boxes of books in my cellar, trying to find something. And I stumbled upon some old work calendars. And the oldest one was from 1975. And I opened up this calendar and I went to September 15th, which was the present date. I went to September 15th, and there was my first professional booking. And I brought the calendar upstairs and I said to my wife, Judy, Judy, look at this. We've been doing this for 40. This is like a celebration. We've been doing this for 40 years. And she said, huh. And that was the extent of our celebration right there. That was the whole thing. But that captured me, that I realized, oh my goodness, there aren't very many people who have been able to do this, to be self-employed and to do only what I started out doing back in 1975. I've never had a boss. I've never had a job. This is all I've done, is write my own material, whether it's music or theater or comedy, and perform it. That's all I've ever done. And so I began to sort of reverse engineer. What have I been doing? What has enabled me to do what so few people really have been able to pull off? And I realized that the element through all of it has been creativity. And then I started thinking, well, what is it? What is this? And I came to the understanding that there are two words that are really helpful for us to understand what creativity is and how it works. And those two words are, the first one is gift, and the second one is craft. Creativity is a gift in as much as something of creativity is woven into our very genes. We're born with it. But we're not born creative. What we're born with is the capacity and the desire to experience creativity. And we all begin using this gift almost immediately as we move from infancy into our early childhood. We begin experimenting with this gift, which is just a capacity, just a desire. But we begin experimenting with it through the process of play. I have people say to me very often, I'm not creative. My brother is, my sister's the creative one in the family, but I couldn't create something to save my life. To which I say, well, you're probably right. I mean, if you say so, if you say you're not creative, you're probably not. But you used to be. When you were a baby, one day you rolled from your front to your back and you couldn't wait to try it again. And you got up on your knees one day and you rocked back and forth for about a week before you even dared to crawl. And it was just thrilling to you. And you learned that if you did that thing with your nose, your parents would laugh, and you loved it. And you held a crayon in your hand and you pulled it over a piece of paper one day. Man, that was exciting. Or in the case of my 4-year-old son, by the way, who is now an artist, he's 40, you found out that you could take that pink magic marker and color in all the white flowers on mom and dad's new couch. That was an exciting day in our family for everybody. And you were doing what we all did. You were experimenting with that gift that gift aspect of creativity through the medium of play. All of our play as children was creative. And in fact, even as adults, when we experience creativity, and you know this, Sarah, when you experience creativity, it still feels like play. It's so fun. So what happens to that gift? Where does it go? Well, that depends upon where you live. If you're a hungry child living in a third world poverty somewhere and you're hauling water for hours every day and you're suffering with malaria, there's not a lot of time or energy left for play at the end of the day. And if you're a child in our developed Western world, when you go to school, you discover real early on that you have to give the one right answer to the question. And at the end of the line, you have to write in that one correct word. And you have to write the one correct number at the bottom of that math problem. And you have to circle the one correct multiple choice. And it gets harder and harder to experience that gift of creativity because creativity doesn't work that way. Creativity is not about finding the one correct answer. Creativity is about playfully trying many, many possible correct answers. So the gift is still there. It doesn't go away, but you find yourself unable to open it up. So you begin to feel that you're not creative anymore. Other people are. You can see that. It's apparent. But you just guess you didn't get the gift at all. And I really believe that that's where most people are. And I think that the sadness about that is because we're made to create, it's not a gift that just some people have. We're born with that capacity and that desire. So if we do not fulfill that, I think there's always a sense that there's something missing in our lives. And that's why it's helpful to understand that the gift is the capacity and the desire, but creativity itself is actually a craft. It's a skill. It's a process. And like all crafts, we get better and better at it by practicing the creative fundamentals of discipline as long as we know what they are. And that's that's where I've been, and that's what I'm now teaching.
Oh my gosh. I could listen to you talk about this all day long. One of my favorite quotes is, and I think it was Albert Einstein who said this, which is kind of weird, but he said, creativity is intelligence having fun. And I love that. I love that so much. And there's something in us. And you touched a little bit on going to school and being taught that there's just one right answer, where we have I don't know if it's the desire to play, but the permission to play sort of wrung out of us as we age, as we grow up. And we end up thinking of creativity as something, just for kids. And how do you get back into giving yourself permission to play? How do you give yourself permission to be creative again?
Well, you have to actually start. And it's like in learning any craft, you have to dive in some way. You have to say, I'm going to do this. What I identified is that there are three disciplines of creativity. And if we practice these disciplines, we actually develop, and this is neuroscience now, we actually develop a neural pathway in our brain that wasn't there before. You've probably heard the saying that you can develop a habit in 3 weeks. Well, I'd heard that my whole life since I was a little boy. I don't even know if the word neuroscience existed when I was a little boy, but I had heard that in 3 weeks you can develop a habit, and it's actually true now. And they've proven that they can actually see it. They can take a picture of your brain and the activity there, and then 3 weeks later, if you've practiced anything, in fact, they even say if you practice something between 4 and 15 minutes a day for 3 weeks, if you really concentrate working on something, you develop a new neural pathway. It's not a strong one, but it's there. And then if you repeat that cycle 2 or 3 more times, you actually get a really strong neural pathway, and things become habits. And we normally think of habits from a negative perspective, but habits are wonderful, can be wonderful things. I mean, think about this. I don't know if you know this or not, Sarah, but when you get up in the morning and you put your shoes on, you always put the same shoe on first every day. It's either the right or the left, obviously. You put that shoe on first. And try it tomorrow. When you get up, try to put the other one on first. And it will feel so strange. And you'll be thinking, this is not right. When you take a shower, when you get out of the shower, drying off, when we dry off after a shower, it's like choreography. We do it like a dance. It's exactly the same day after day after day, which is a wonderful thing because we don't have to think about it anymore. We don't have to waste any energy trying to figure out how do I dry myself off or how do I dress. We do it the same every single day. And that's the idea. The idea is to make the creative process, to dive in, to work at these disciplines, to make the creative process a habit so that you don't have to think about it. So it's not hard work. It's actually easy. And then it becomes a lot more fun. And I've identified these 3 disciplines. And I say this is how you get GIT. This is how you get your Masters of Creativity. G stands for grab, I for interrogation, and T for transform. I is for interrogate. So grab, interrogate, and transform. And what we grab, and when I say grab, I mean we write down so we don't lose it. We grab anything that grabs us emotionally. So in any emotion. So I know I'm speaking mainly to writers here. This is the most useful thing for a writer. Sometimes we get the idea that I need to come up with some ideas. I don't have any ideas. I need to find some ideas. No, you don't need to think of ideas. Just become emotionally aware and begin writing down random thoughts, memories, experiences, things that happen this very day that have an emotional component to that pull you, that grab you emotionally. So it's something that makes you smile, something that makes you sad, something that ticks you off. It's not an idea. It's just something that grabbed you emotionally, and you write it down. Saw that little girl in the market, the way her mom treated her, ticked me off. Saw this. Saw the spider webs on the plants, the dew on the spider webs in that field of flowers today. Never seen those before. Just so you write down like a sentence or just a few words, just enough to remember it. And if you do this every day, as you can imagine, in a week, you've got 15, 20 things probably that you've grabbed during the week. So you grab those things, then you interrogate them, which is simply going back to that journal or back to that list. I just call it my grab file. It's on my phone. I don't actually write it down. I speak it in.
Yeah.
You go back to that list and you interrogate it. You scan down through that list, and several of them will jump out at you as being the strongest ones. And you say, why did you grab me? Why do I still feel what I feel when I remember this experience? What do you want to be? Are you an illustration? Are you a character in a book? Are you something that character might say to somebody else? Could I use you in some way? What is your purpose? You interrogate it. And then, and you understand this, I know you understand this, Sarah, and so many of your listeners do too. There's a moment when you've grabbed and then you're interrogating your list. There's the moment when the thought that you've grabbed, it's not an idea, it's just a thought that you've grabbed. When it becomes an idea, that's the aha moment. There it is, where you go, now I know what I can do with that. And that's the most exciting moment, because the thoughts you've grabbed are not actionable, but ideas are. And once that thought that you've grabbed and interrogated becomes an idea, now you have something you can do with it. You can actually transform it into whatever that creation is, whether it's a chapter in a book or a character in a book or something that this character would say. And often when you're grabbing these things, they're so random that you go, well, what would I ever do with that? Why did I even think that? Why did that grab me? I was thinking about a memory just a couple weeks ago. I had no idea where it came from. I remember being 5 years old with my dad at a football game. And I remember it was November because the players were covered with mud. It's northern Pennsylvania. It was snowing. We're all bundled up. I'm sitting to my dad's right. He has a bag of popcorn in his hand, and he looks over to an older gentleman next to him who I didn't know, and he says, "Would you like some popcorn?" And the old man said, No, I do not care for that. I got one of those popcorn seeds stuck under my tooth right there about a month ago, and I just got it out. I do not want any popcorn. Now, what on earth is that? I mean, it's not an idea. But when I remember it, it's still, there's something about it that I remember the smell of cigars and in that people in the stands. I remember the smell of the popcorn. I remember my dad reaching over. I don't know why that is. I don't know what it is, but I grabbed it and it's written down there, and it might become a scene. It might become a story. It might become an illustration of my dad's generosity. I don't know. I have no idea. I need to interrogate it to see what it is. But you grab and you interrogate and you transform. And as you do this every day, and it only takes a few minutes a day, pretty soon it becomes intuitive, it becomes a habit, and it becomes easy. And what really is happening is you're becoming emotionally alive, where these things used to just go by you and you didn't feel them, so you didn't even think about them. Now when you're paying attention, you start to wake up emotionally.
So I'm a writer, and in my practice, I read a lot of books about creativity. I read a lot about writing. I don't think that I've ever gotten such a beautifully succinct definition and sort of process for developing creativity. This is amazing, and I love that you start it with something that is accessible to everyone. And I know that there's people who are closed off to their emotions, but just even realizing that that's where it begins, I think will give people a starting point, just the willingness to discover your emotions. Does all creativity start with that self-discovery?
Oh, I think it does. But we, for various reasons, and there are other reasons than poverty, or other reasons in our educational system. Those are just some examples, but there are other reasons why we shut down emotionally. I wrote a play back in the mid '90s with two of my buddies and the play is called Triple Espresso, and it's a comedy. Triple Espresso, a highly caffeinated comedy. It takes place in a coffee. It's a 3-man play, 3 comics. It takes place in a coffee shop, and it's a wonderful. It's about as much as you can laugh in 2 hours, and it took off around the world actually. And we went to London, and we were in Dublin, Ireland for 2 years, and that's the play that broke box office records. And even though so many people haven't heard of it, it sold 3 million tickets over the years. So it was just huge. And we were in Dublin, Ireland for 2 years, and every night leaving the theater, I was walking back to my flat. I walked by an art store, and in the window, and it was lit up beautifully in the darkness of outside, but the window was lit up beautifully, and there was a box of pastels there and there must have been 100, 200, maybe 300 pastels in this beautiful wooden box. And I would stop and look at all those colors. And of course, they're organized, as you can imagine, so that they're just grades of color. And it's just beautiful to look at that box. Mm-hmm. And something in it began to grab me. I'd like to try that. Boy, I'd like to hold one of those pastels in my hand. I'd like to see what that would do on that lightly sanded paper that you use for pastels. And so I bought a small set. And it led to painting for about 5 years with pastels. And I discovered something so interesting. Just because I was painting every day, I discovered that I was beginning to see the world around me completely differently than I had ever seen it before. For example, I discovered that shadows are hardly ever gray. I discovered, and this is one that really blew me away, chrome. When I say to you, Sarah, I want you to take this box of crayons here, and I want you to create what a chrome bumper looks like on a car. What color would you choose?
Oh gosh, gray. Gray.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
gray or
white,
silver, right?
or yeah.
You'd pick gray or silver. But you take a look at a chrome bumper. It's rarely gray or silver unless it's in a gray environment, unless you're just looking at it from the roadside that's being reflected. But if it's in a forest, the bumper is filled with blue sky and green leaves and brown trees, and it's just this beautiful display of all these bright colors. That's what chrome actually is. I'd never seen that before, and it was so exciting to wake up visually. And I think that when we practice creativity, when we practice grabbing and those random thoughts that grab us emotionally and interrogating them, and then going through the process of transforming. And by the way, the process is not always linear. You don't just grab and then interrogate and transform. Da-da, there it is. I mean, sometimes you get lucky. Even in writing, you get lucky in that it happens that way. But usually what happens is you grab and you interrogate and then you start transforming. But in the process of transforming, in the process of writing, for example, things end up being quite different because then you grab more and but what if I did that? I have to interrogate this because if I did that, what's going to happen to this character? And that's how things begin to, that sense of them writing themselves. But it's still grabbing and interrogating and transforming. When you begin practicing those disciplines, you don't wake up visually like you do because painting is a visual art, but creating is an emotional process. That's what you're doing. And so creating helps you to wake up emotionally. It really is a beautiful thing. I was so concerned when I thought these thoughts that I'm describing to you now, and then I thought, well, maybe I could teach this. And then I'm thinking, well, is this real? Doesn't everybody know this, that this is the way it works, that this is what it is? And I started putting together this online course, which took me 6 months of really heavy work to do. And every day I would say, is this real? And then I would think about what I'd done working on the course all day, writing it and putting it in and taping it and editing it. And every day, all I did was grab and interrogate and transform. That's the creative process. That's what you do. This is interesting. Some people, they're just intuitively creative for, again, a variety of reasons. And those are the people we normally say, oh, that person has the gift of creativity, or that person is so creative. Usually it's just they're doing it intuitively. They're doing it naturally, and that is kind of a gift. And what a wonderful thing that is. But they're guaranteed to get themselves in trouble if they don't know the process. I recently listened to a TED talk by Gordon Sumner, Sting. The world knows as Sting. And he was talking about his creative process. And here's a man who has won 16 Grammy Awards. He's been nominated for Grammys 38 times. He's won American Music Awards. He's won dozens and dozens of those. I mean, he's one of the top musical creatives, writers of the last 100 years, certainly. And he describes how a number of years ago, he went dry, and he couldn't write a song, and he actually did not write a song for 8 years. If you can imagine that. I mean, that's when you start. After 8 years, you start to go, well, I guess that's not what I do anymore. I guess that's not who I am. 8 years, he did not write one song. And as he describes it, he says, my muse went away. That's a very literary kind of way of speaking of creativity, that my muse, she disappeared. Well, I want to say, Sting, there is no muse. The muse didn't go away. What happened is your creative reservoir went dry because you didn't know how to fill it. And if you had known that you should be all the time grabbing and interrogating thoughts that come into your mind, you would have ideas just pleading for your attention all of the time. And it's interesting, the way he got out of this 8-year dry period is he heard somebody speak in the dialect that he grew up with in England. It was a shipbuilding town. I can't remember the name of it. But he grew up in this shipbuilding city, and people spoke with a certain dialect. And he heard somebody speak in that dialect, and it grabbed his ear. And it moved. There was something in it like, oh, people talk they used to talk like that where I grew up. Everybody talked that way. And he began thinking about these people back then. And it was grabbing him emotionally, and he grabbed it back. Now, I'm not saying he phrased it that way, but he heard the dialect, and he actually wrote a little ditty, he wrote a little rhyme in that dialect, and then he got his guitar and he put a little melody to it, and it was nothing. It was like, well, what would I ever do with this? And then he wrote another one and another one. And he kept grabbing and interrogating and transforming these little songs that he was writing. And that led him to go, I wonder if these could be a musical about my boyhood, about growing up in this little town. And he then got some people to collaborate with, and they wrote the book, and they arranged the songs, and then he began to perform the songs to see how they worked on stage, and they were working, and they kept writing. And it was that grabbing and interrogating and transforming process that led to his Broadway musical, The Last Ship, which I saw in Chicago 4 or 5 years ago. It was wonderful, and it played for, I think, 6-7 months on Broadway, and I think it's playing in the West End of London now, and it will tour for years. But he got out of that 8-year dry period because something grabbed him, and he grabbed it back. That's the beginning of that creative process.
I love that you talk about Sting's TED Talk, about the way that he sort of harnessed memories. I feel like this is something very similar to what you're doing in your new podcast, the Wideeyed Creative. Can you tell us a little about that?
I sure can. I wanted to find a way to market my online course, Mastering the Craft of Creativity. I launched it. You know, Sarah, there are all these, you can go on and buy all these courses about how to create courses online. You pay lots of money to to figure out how to even make a course so that you can sell it. And it's so, the whole marketing thing, I don't enjoy it very much. But I've been thinking about podcasting. My sons, who are grown men now, they had been saying to me, Dad, you should be podcasting. And I said, I think I'm a little late to the game. And they said, no, you're not late to the game. There are millions of podcasts. What do you mean late to the game? Just do your own, And so it doesn't matter how many people listen to it. Obviously, you'd love to have a big audience, but start it and somebody will hear it. And that'll give you an opportunity to talk about your course as well. So, but I didn't want to do a podcast to just sell my course. So I wanted to model in my podcast how I've used this process of grabbing, interrogating, and transforming to create stories of my own. It's interesting because of the podcast I've been on since I've done this work. I've been a guest on many podcasts like yours, and most of them have been business podcasts. Very few have been writing or painting or dancing podcasts. And this is so fun because it applies just so directly to what you do and what so many of your listeners do. But one of the things that's been fun for me is years ago, I moved my mom and dad out of their home in Pennsylvania. This was a home that I grew up in for the first 18 years of my life that they lived in for 50 years, during which time they threw away nothing. And so my dad said, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do this. And he's old. So I said, well, I'll fly out and help you. So I live in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, but I flew back to Pennsylvania and was helping my dad empty out the basement, which was just a remarkable job. And we got it all emptied out except for one table that had 20 slide carousels and a slide projector on. He says, what are we going to do with these? They take up a lot of space, And I said, Dad, you don't have to be the keeper of the slides anymore. Just, I will take care of those for you. So I said, put them in those boxes, send them to me to Minnesota. I will protect the legacy of family slides here. And I remembered our family slideshows, and I remembered that they were not very good. My folks, we had bad equipment, and my folks were not good photographers. But I started going through these slides, and you talk about being grabbed. It's like every slide, and I remembered all of them because my generation, we had slides. We would have a family slideshow every 6 weeks because, unlike today, in the digital age, children have no idea the fun they missed out on with double exposures and the kinds of stuff that we dealt with. But we would take a roll of 12 pictures or maybe 24. Later, I think you could even take 36 pictures on a roll if your camera was big enough. But then you'd send them to Kodak in Rochester, New York, and you'd have to wait a month until that yellow envelope came back, and you'd open them up, and then you'd put the slides in a slide tray, and you'd have to put the screen up, and then you'd have to plug the projector in and put it on the little coffee table there, and to look at the 20 new slides that you got, or 24 new slides you got, or 12 new slides you got. And then somebody would always say, oh, go a little, let's watch a few more. And we'd end up watching 1,000 slides. And we do this every six weeks, every 2 months of my boyhood. So I had all these slides memorized. I remembered them, but hadn't seen them in 20 or 30 years. And so to look at those slides of my family, starting when I was about 5 and on up through our lives and family vacations and things that we did, I would be grabbed, looking at one slide, I'd be grabbed by numerous things in the slide. One of my, I have a picture of my little sister sitting on the bed. She was 2, and she had on a hair dryer, not the kind where you put the bonnet on, and it blows up with warm air. And so I can see her, which was like, oh, there's my little 2-year-old sister. That's so adorable. And she had the feet of her pajamas. One of them was turned back, upside down, so it looked like her foot. She didn't have a foot, because it was hanging off the edge of the bed. Her sleeper pajamas. And in the corner there was a tubular stand with a stereo on it. It was my older sister's stereo. And beneath that, there was a record album. I could see the cover of the front record album. I couldn't see any of the rest of them. But as I'm thinking about it, I remembered every one of those albums in there. The last one of which was Meet the Beatles. And that got me thinking about that experience of the first time that I heard the Beatles, and the first time that my sister and I took that and put that on the stereo and played that. And there's so many things were grabbing me. And so I thought, well, I've got to write this. So I just started taking one slide at a time, and I would write a short story about that slide. And then the next one, I'd write a story about that slide. So I have dozens of these stories. And so I teach about creativity, and then I tell one of those stories. And it's been really fun because sometimes I'm talking about people, other people who are in the slides. And sometimes I identify them if it's appropriate, but other times I think, well, I don't know where this person is. I probably shouldn't say their name. So I won't identify them by name. But then I put these podcasts out there. And it's so fun. My very first podcast was one about my buddy John that I sang music with in high school. He was in a rock band. He was a year older. I just admired this guy. And when the band broke up, he said, hey, you want to do some duet stuff? And we sang together for 2 years. And it was just such a creative, wonderful experience. And he, being an older person that I admired, he made me feel important. And he made me feel like maybe I could do this. Maybe I had value as a performer. And so I told this story about him. I haven't seen him in 35 years. And then I get an email or Facebook, I can't remember what it was, but some message from him saying, haven't heard your voice in 35 years. And I was in the bathroom the other night, connected to the bedroom, and I heard your voice coming from my bedroom. My wife had stumbled upon your first podcast, and we sat and listened to it, and I just loved it. But then he goes, but then I couldn't sleep because there were some things in it that it kind of bothered me because I wondered, you kind of left me hanging up in the air. You kind of, you left me as the guy like, well, whatever happened to him, and could he succeed? He came from such a tough boyhood. Could he be successful in life? No, that's where the story ended. I didn't know what had happened in his life, And so he said, let me tell you what's happened. Let me tell you the good things that have come out of that difficult childhood that I grew up with. And I said, why don't you come on the podcast and set the record straight yourself? So we had a wonderful conversation. And then several others have responded in the same way. I actually have a story. One of the stories I tell about meeting Tom Hanks when I was 21 years old, working at a camp out in California. He was 16. He was just a kid taking the garbage out and trimming the flowers, at this camp. He was a nobody. And I tell this story about working with Tom Hanks. Of course, now I've ruined it for every one of your listeners. But at the end, I said, so Tom, I don't know if you remember it this way. You want to set the record straight? Come on. It'll be fun.
Has he gotten in touch with you yet?
No, not yet. And I understand it's not likely, but you never know, do you, Sarah? I mean, somebody in this world, somebody could get it to them and say, "Hey, listen to this podcast about you." So anyway, it's just been a delight to do it, and as a result, more people have learned about my class, Mastering the Craft of Creativity, and several have bought it and enjoyed it, and that has just been a real, honestly, that's been a blessing for me to listen to students say, learning this process and going through this process and working through the lessons that we do, and we have an online community. We have a Facebook page where people are submitting their lessons, and then we can all talk about it and respond to it. And I also, and this is great, it's been wonderful. I was concerned that, will people, should I actually be talking to people on the phone? Should I, so I haven't done this before. And I went, oh, what the heck? People want to talk? Yeah, we'll talk. And so we have, and I've just made myself fully available to folks to call me. You're having trouble with the process? It's hard to grab things at first. When I have students say, I went through the whole day today. I didn't grab a thing. Nothing grabbed me. And I would say, well, you're right. Nothing grabbed you because you're not awake yet. But keep working at this. Keep working at the process. And pretty soon, well, I did grab something today. I grabbed this and I grabbed that. And now I'm interrogating it. And then they begin to transform things and write stories or write songs or put together videos. It's just been such a delight. And to have people say, this course it's changed my life. Well, what more could a teacher want than that?
You mentioned earlier when you were talking about painting, you said, you know what, I'd like to try that. And then you did. And it seems like you've done that throughout your entire life with all these different forms of creativity, from podcasting to teaching to painting to playwriting. This is just so inspiring and wonderful.
Yeah, I had a friend come up to me after. I have a one-man show called That Wonder Boy, and I've only done the show 100 times in 4 or 5 different runs around the country. Theater's it's a very expensive medium, and it's hard to get it produced, and you can lose so much money so quickly. Or you can, as I say in theater, you can't make a living, but you can make a killing, and that's really true. And in our first production, the first play I ever wrote was Triple Espresso that I wrote with my 2 buddies, and we made a killing on that, which made me think, oh, this is easy. Well, then I wrote a one-man show called That Wonder Boy, and actually won some wonderful awards, which I was so grateful for. But it's so difficult to get it produced and to make these runs profitable. But I had a guy come up to me after seeing my one-man show, and he said, I would love to write the backstory that I had a backstory that I didn't really tell. He said, I'd like to write a backstory as a screenplay from your theater show here. Oh. Would you like to work with me on that? And I'd never worked on a screenplay before. I didn't know anything about writing a screenplay, but he'd had lots of experience writing screenplays. So we started. That was 7 or 8 years ago. We've now written literally 81 rewrites of our screenplay.
Holy cow.
And we have then, sometimes the rewrites are very small. We might just change a paragraph here or two, but we have to identify that as well. Mm-hmm. That's the newest version, and submitted it to lots and lots of contests and pitched it many times, and nothing's happened with it yet. And now we've started to write we're writing a TV series, and it's just been. I don't know that it will amount to anything. I don't know if I'll ever make a dime, and we've spent a lot of money, on working on it. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful creative process. It's kept my mind sharp, and even more importantly, it's kept my spirit sharp. Mm. And that's what I want. I'm experiencing the fun of play in creativity. At age 65, even more so than I ever did in the past. It's just been great. It's been wonderful, and this is something, honestly, you writers out there, you should be experiencing the fun of creativity in your writing. And if you're dry, if you feel like I've just hit a writer's block, I can't write a thing, you've got to begin grabbing what grabs you emotionally. Just grab. It's not an idea, and that's the frustrating thing. People go, yeah, well, what's that? What's that? I did that. I don't even know what that is. It's just I don't know why it grabbed me. What am I going to do with that? That's not going to help me in what I'm writing right now. No, but it might help you later in what you're writing, and it might help you in what you're writing right now. Things grab us for a reason, but if we're not emotionally awake or alive, things just go by us and we're losing them all the time. And those are this stuff that we're grabbing. That's who we really are. There's a reason that something grabs you and it doesn't grab me. It's unique to you, Sarah. That's why it grabs you. And that's what you need to grab back, because that's the stuff you need to be writing from. That needs to be the resource that you use in your writing if you're going to write something that's uniquely you. Otherwise, you just write. You can write like somebody else all day long if you want to. You can copy somebody else, but it's not going to be satisfying because it's not you. Yeah.
You can't see me, but I am nodding so vehemently right now.
I can hear you. I can hear you nodding.
You can hear the marbles in my head shaking around. Just talking to you has made me want to go forth into my day, cancel every single thing I have planned, sit down with a pad of paper and some pastels, or maybe just get in front of my typewriter and just write and create. I love everything that you've said about emotional resonance. I think so many people are so afraid to talk about emotions, but they are so crucial to your creative life. And like you said, to awakening to your creativity. So thank you so much for sharing everything that you've learned and everything that you've discovered about the creative process with us.
You're so welcome. And I would love to, if any of you listeners out there, if you're doing events, if you have things that are happening where you're looking for speakers to speak on creativity, or if you're looking just for a night of fun comedy, that's what I do. And I would love to come do that for people as well. So.
How can people find you? I'm going to have links in the show notes for this episode today, bobstromberg.com/rightnow for access to Bob's course. But where else can people find you online?
The best place is bobstromberg.com, but also I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, and I mainly use those places to promote. I'm not a chatty Facebook person.
That is okay.
I just don't have time to be playing on Facebook very much, but I use it for professionally. So I'm putting up info about the podcast and about the course and other things that I'm doing. I was on Steve Harvey last week on that the Forever Young show.
Yeah.
Little Big Shots Forever Young. Just had a ball. So that's the kind of thing where that occupied a week's worth of my Facebook time with people just responding to that and so on. So
that is awesome.
Yeah, I make shadows. If you can imagine, that's one of the things that kind of become a calling card for me in my comedy work. Is I create hand shadows on a screen, and it's really, really fun. But once again, that's one of those things like, why would you do that, Bob? Why who does that? And the answer is, well, not very many people. But it grabbed me. I was every kid has made a hand shadow, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody has made a hand shadow on the sidewalk or on the side of the building or in the classroom or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I did that, and I went, boy, this could be fun. I think I'm going to work on this, which I did for lots of years, and have kind of become a hand shadow artist too. So anyway,
I love it. You make art out of everything. This is so cool.
I'm rambling now, Sarah. So.
Well, your rambling is wonderful. And thank you again so much for sharing your story, for sharing your process, and for just sharing your personality with us today. This has been truly a gem. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. My pleasure.